Welcome back to Babes in Bookland, your women's memoir podcast. I'm your host, Alex Franca, and today author Deborah J. Cohan joins us to discuss her memoir, Welcome to Wherever We Are, a memoir of family, caregiving, and redemption. Today's conversation is extremely layered. What do you do when the person who shaped you also wounded you? Deborah's memoir dives into emotional and psychological abuse, loyalty, caregiving guilt, and the radical act of embracing ambivalence. Our conversation is intimate, it's thoughtful, it might make you rethink what forgiveness even means. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, it's so great to be here, Alex.
I'm just so excited to have you on the podcast because honestly, Deborah, your memoir was so compelling to me. I am in awe of what you were capable of, to see and to hold on to the duality of who your father was, hold on to the love. I think a lot of us can resonate with your experience, maybe not necessarily the abuse, though I think unfortunately a lot of people can, but this idea that our parents are people too, with faults, big faults. And ultimately, it is up to us to decide how and if we want to keep them in our lives. You chose to be there for your father until the end. And I appreciated your perspective, even as I wonder if I would have done the same.
Lots of complicated topics come up in the book, so it's fun to unpack it with someone who is really thoughtful about it and taking it seriously and just sort of getting it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, before we really dig in, I want to share this quote because I think it just really encapsulates your memoir to kind of introduce it to people before we get into it. You write, "Life forces us to sit with juxtaposition, abuse and love, fear and hope, memory and blank space, joy and grief, connection and disconnection. This book is an attempt to make sense of these family fault lines, primarily through the prism of my relationship with my father, an extraordinarily complicated man." Okay, so your memoir came out in 2020. What's the response been like in the past 6 years? Anything that you're like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have said that? Do you teach it in your class? You are a sociology professor, so your students read it. That must be a wild experience.
It really is. It really, really is. There's a lot to say about that, actually. Yeah, it's so weird. When you say 6 years, it's hard to believe that it's like my little baby is in kindergarten or something, that it's really bizarre. And, and you can see in this room, I've got the poster of that book and then my new book that just came out in July, which is not a memoir, but there's definitely a lot of personal stories in it about prepping for college. So it's interesting. There's a lot of ways in which this book, it's kind of evergreen, right? People could read it really at any time. The topic is one that sadly, in a way, it continues to resonate with people and it will continue to just, given demographic shifts and so many people involved in caregiving and so many people involved in complicated family dynamics. It's not a how-to book, but people still seem to take away some lessons or some thoughts that help them kind of manage their own situation, which is what I hoped to do. My regret has nothing to do with the writing of it. In fact, there's really nothing in it. It's freeing to be able to say this, that there's nothing where I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had never said that. Or, oh my gosh, I wish I had never put this out there. Or, oh, I really wish I had said this. I don't feel that way. Mm-hmm. My regret is that it's hard to write books. It's hard to get them published and find a good publisher. And then it's hard to, promote our work. Try doing that for your first book in a pandemic. And that was my situation. So this dream of becoming, an author of a book, which was something I really wanted to do. I had published before, but I really wanted this book. This book is like it is truly like a passion project for me. And it's really like a heartfelt kind of a project. And it was really rough going. Sort of funny. It came out on Valentine's Day in 2020, which was so fitting because I love Valentine's Day. And my dad and I actually always had a connection with Valentine's Day. He was just always very sweet about stuff he did for Valentine's Day. And it was so fitting when I found out that was the publication date, since of course I had no say in that date. I didn't know at the time as I was getting ready to launch this, like, oh, in a month, like I'll have a month to do a book tour and go around talking to people in different states. And it was so exhilarating. It was just spectacular. And the stories I have from being on that book tour, just a few really incredible moments that really stand out. And then it was just really hard to then go to, okay, now I have to figure out how to do this otherwise. I mean, I had my few moments of almost like a kid, like having a temper tantrum. It was like a
Sure.
grief tantrum too, because it was just
Yeah.
like, no, like this is what I want, like, and I didn't really realize at the time. And now, like, here's an example that, like, still years later, I would be on Zooms talking with people, doing podcasts, doing these things. I mean, it's a wonderful outcome of what was really challenging when it began.
You kind of were robbed of this experience that you were looking forward to. You got a taste of it, and then it was like, nope, sorry, just kidding, never mind.
That was the part that was really, really hard. I was lucky for what I did get, and then that just sort of started some word of mouth. It's just fun to have those conversations about a project that's been in your mind and in your heart for so long, and it's like weighed on you so, so much.
Yeah.
Coupled with the fact that just that was such such an intense year for everyone for so many different reasons, obvious ones and maybe less obvious ones.
I totally resonate with this idea of like every time you create art, you're putting a piece of your soul out there. And I think most of us create art because we want to impact the world in a positive way, either say, hey, this is what I was experiencing. Are you experiencing it too? Or ask people a question to sit and reflect on. And you just want to make as many connections as possible. It's not even about this ego thing where it's like, I did this amazing thing and everyone needs to recognize me. It's like, here's this part of my heart and I want to just share it with you and I want to share it with as many people as possible. I think your book will continue to grow in importance and resonate with people because we have an aging population. We have a major disconnect with generations right now where people are really struggling to love one another, even within their same families. And I really think that your book offers not answers, Deborah's way of navigating that encourages us all to ask questions that maybe we reach different conclusions to. Like I said, I don't know if I could have done what you did, Deborah. Just who I am at this point in my life, I don't know. But does your experience make me think? I do keep coming back to your memoir and I just keep thinking about it. I just keep thinking about it, which is, I think, why you wrote it.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the greatest love letter to an author, really, is like if it does continue to raise questions for someone or that you kind of keep coming back to certain pieces or parts or lines or whatever, I feel like that's, the best writing certainly does that for me. I think we write to connect. It seems more crucial than ever now with the state of the world to sort of keep doing that.
Yeah. I think that there's a really specific point of view that you bring as a sociologist. So before we really get further into it, in a nutshell, what is sociology and how you kind of became interested in the field, your education, career, and background?
Well, I went to college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I tell the story that I was enrolled in a philosophy class and I sat, sort of close to the front. It was a big lecture hall, big enough, I guess, at that time. And I was just nodding off. I was just, I'm not getting this. This is like, my dad was just like, oh, a college degree is incomplete without a philosophy class. So, I took it with that idea of, I guess I should have a philosophy class as a liberal arts, student. I just couldn't deal with it. And the class I really wanted to take, I was very far down on this waiting list for this social problems class in the sociology department. About 3 weeks into the semester, the phone rings and it's my advisor who said, really great news. There's a spot in the social problems class if you would like it, and you'd have a lot of catching up to do. And I said, yes, absolutely. Sign me up. I took that class. I'm still in touch with that professor, by the way.
I love that.
Yeah, that was one of my best stories from the book tour. He showed up. The coolest part is I got to introduce him to one of my very favorite former students.
That is so cool.
That was really incredible. So I say this to say that he was really formative. I mean, like I was learning a lot in that social problems class that semester it just gave me language and tools to make sense of things I had already cared about. Yeah. Race relations or drug abuse or suicide or like any kind of, social problem, essentially. Yeah. And it just gave me a lens for seeing the world in a new way. And it was from that class I went to my advisor and declared the sociology major it was my second semester of my freshman year. I think what I love about sociology is that it's like, you're looking at very common things. It's all stuff that people have heard about, like if it's weddings or childbirth or divorce or death or whatever. But we're looking at it in a really uncommon way, in a way that it's different than psychology because we're looking more at larger social forces in people's lives. And so as well as like the individual's relationship to the larger society. So what I find compelling about sociology is just the look at not just the individual, but the larger structure of the society and the structure of the institutions that we inhabit, like families, for example, religion, the educational systems, mass media, the workplace, the government, all of these different things are always weighing in and on our lives. And sociology really is a way to make sense of the individual's placement and role in those institutions and sort of the impact that the individual can have on, or groups of individuals can have on those institutions, and also the role that those institutions have on individuals and groups of individuals. What I try to say to my students is that the institutions socialize us in certain ways as human beings, but then we also give back messages. There's like push and pull, and there's ways in which individuals, of course, groups of individuals agitate for social change or personal change or whatever it might be. I find it to be a very compelling perspective, and one that really lends itself well to memoir. And just in the same way I'm talking about sociology, like we could talk about memoir, because like with memoir, there's the sense of I'm telling my personal private story with all of its idiosyncrasies and whatever that's really particular to my situation. But if I tell it well, it's going to be relatable and universal to a much larger group. So you didn't need to have grown up in Cleveland as an only child with parents like I did and all of this stuff at the time I did to still find it something that speaks to you.
Yeah.
I took a workshop years ago with the writer Rebecca McClanahan. I remember her saying, this was so long ago in 2003, but she made a comment of there was like the I in memoir, the capital letter I, but then there's like the I, EYE, of the larger sort of public. When she said it, it was like light bulbs went off in my head, because it was like, that's exactly what I teach my students with sociology, is that for me, memoir and sociology just go totally hand in hand. And part of the reason I assigned the book is because it does touch on a zillion different sociological issues, and the students seem to do better with story. They can ask and talk to me about hopefully anything they want, so that this is a way for them to go a little deeper. Plus, I really work with a student population that, I don't think any of them have had the experience really of talking with authors and having that sort of time. Because there are so many other issues in it, right?
Yeah.
The stuff about grief, and there's divorce and later in life marriage and demographic shift stuff and friendship and family violence, obviously. So many different pieces in it. There's a lot that it touches on.
It just reminds me that like the more exposure people have to the ways that other people live their lives, the more connection that you actually, and like reflection that you actually see of yourself and them. And it helps us get rid of that otherness. That
I think it's true. I do think that good memoir can invite compassion. Memoir that lacks the self-reflection is memoir that doesn't. And there is that. There's definitely enough of that out there too. I think memoir that is really introspective and that then asks the reader to like go deeper too. That's like everything I do with my students. I've been teaching for 30 years. And I feel like the constant refrain I always get from students is you got me to think about things I never thought of before, or you got me to think about the world differently, or my place in the world.
Yeah. Why I hold the beliefs that I hold, and if those are actually accurate beliefs.
Oh my gosh, exactly. Because a lot of students will come from backgrounds where they weren't taught to question. In fact, questioning was bad. And so, and here they are in a situation where I'm like pushing that further and further and deeper and deeper. And so it's a little scary and threatening. Sometimes like people will resist it, but then they also will often find it very freeing. It gives them
Yeah.
permission to sort of be their own person.
Right. Yeah. In the memoir, you gave us so much of yourself. You're so vulnerable, so honest with some really, really difficult experiences that you went through. And it's because of that generosity that you invite people in to question these things and reflect on these things and reflect on humanity as a whole. I really appreciated it. And I feel like because of the way that you view the world, would you say that like you see the good in people a lot easier, maybe? Or you don't write people off. You don't seem jaded. You try your best to understand people instead of judge them. Do you think that's who you've always been? Is that why you were drawn to sociology?
I was always the kid who was super curious. In the same way I tried to bring what I call in the book a tender curiosity to looking at these really difficult issues. I also feel like I try to help other people do that for themselves. And I always have, like in the work I did with violent men as a counselor, with students, with friends, even, I've always been someone who people reveal a lot to. So I've held a lot of difficult information. But yeah, as a kid, I was just really curious. I was always asking a million questions, and I was always kind of interested in how things work, why people behave the way that they do. I go back to those old diaries and I look at what I said as a 7 or 8 year old, the only 2 years I really kept a diary in
Yeah.
my life. And it's like, I looked at that and I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, there's a lot of maturity in those entries too, in a way that's like a little too overly grown up. There's the sense that I could see things for what they were. But I do think that people who grew up in situations with domestic violence and stuff, there is a little bit of a sixth sense with certain things.
You have to start paying attention to people's behavior in order to maybe stop something from happening.
Right, exactly. And at the same time, the book it's true to kind of the little girl I was too, though, in terms of like, I loved my dad. I wanted us all to be happy. I'm not really someone who lets go of a relationship easily or something. I can appreciate some complexity and just the fact that people are walking contradictions. I mean, we're just all kind of a bundle of contradictions in terms of what we believe or what we do. And sometimes it's really aggravating, but it's just human. It's just the way people are.
Yeah. You've brought up your father. Tell me about your dad.
I was really blessed with growing up with two parents, both of whom are just wildly creative. That's really the quality in both of them that I really wanted to emulate. With my mother, it was her art. With my father, it was the creative work with advertising that he did. He was a wonderful photographer, and he was just very creative in terms of his aesthetic as well. They both just had quite an eye. And I think that's part of the curiosity piece too, and also part of the perceptive piece as well, is that growing up in a home where it was like really important, like, how do you see things? How do you know things? Was sort of drilled into me at a really young age. Like going to a museum and like, what do I see? What am I remembering? It wasn't so much about like, how do you look to others so much as it was like more, how do you see? How do you look at the world? I
Yeah.
feel like that was a really good quality to get from both of them, actually. Yeah. I mean, I think with my dad, the way I describe it is he was just so adoring and so brilliant and so difficult and so and abusive. And I want to make really clear for listeners that, and part of the goal with the book was that I was really trying to help people understand that abuse is not just physical. It's not just sexual abuse. Those are horrific forms of abuse also. What I was really trying to do was to illuminate all the ways in which there are other kinds of abuse that are extremely damaging, like the emotional abuse, verbal abuse, all the psychological kind of warfare,
Yeah.
and financial control, threats. Threats are huge. That's so abusive. And I mean, right now we are living at a time that all of that seems like it's coming at us in a very global way. And I also feel like people have less understanding of all of the ways that psychological abuse manifests. I mean, we're starting to talk about it more. Like we hear terms like, gaslighting is
Right.
something that has come into public discourse. And yeah, some of this language, like we're naming it a little bit more. But my dad really wasn't, he was not physically abusive, although the threats started to feel like they could become so.
Yeah.
He was not sexually abusive, but I still had too much of my dad. It was almost like he was too involved. And at the same time, he was involved in ways that so many dads in the late 60s, 70s, 80s really weren't that involved. And so some of it was fabulous,
Yeah.
his attentiveness and all of that. Other times, it just was like trying to swallow me whole. All of these forms of abuse are terrible. The thing about it, though, is that sexual abuse and physical abuse still are accompanied by all the forms of abuse that I do talk about. So
Right.
that's why I feel like helping readers unpack that is so crucial. And that's where I feel like I had like an ethical responsibility actually to help people understand this from the professional lens I have, which is, as a sociologist and as someone who's worked in the domestic violence field as long as I did. Those topics are so difficult to reconcile, this loving a person who is also being destructive.
Right. How do you think that you processed or internalized this abuse as a child or attempted to process it, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I felt blamed for a lot. I felt my mother was blamed for a lot. I felt that everybody in his line of fire was blamed for a lot. Like criticism is still really hard. I have such an early memories of how harsh criticism was and how deeply it stung, it's kind of a miracle that I'm with someone who is just not that way and is not critical and is like more fully accepting. I'm able to really talk with my current husband about just the impact of the criticism, and so he knows, and I think he really gets it, and that's huge because that just erodes at a relationship.
When you were writing about these moments with your father, how was that revisiting for you?
For me, it was just, I mean, it feels good to have untangled a lot of the knots that
Mm,
were happening. It was like I needed a book like this when I was going through this. So it's almost like I wrote the book that I would have liked to have had
yeah.
that would have helped me be more forgiving to myself, to just give me more permission. Because it was like, I mean, so many people who are in caregiving situations, even if the relationship is much simpler and cleaner, often feel like they can't do enough. They want to do more, or they're like critical of themselves for coming up short in any way. And I certainly felt that way with my dad, but magnified because I was often told I came up short. I was often
Yeah.
told I wasn't good enough about something. Yes, it was definitely disturbing to like look at certain artifacts, if it was letters or transcribed voicemails or
Yeah.
diaries or any of the things that I went through, because I almost did it like a researcher, not even like a researcher, as a researcher. But there was the sense of like, this sort of sense of being thoroughly in it. I guess this is the sociology part too,
Hmm.
of like being really in it and seeing it as I lived it. And then also, zooming out and seeing this like larger picture where we're like characters in this in a way, because that's
Yeah.
what we are in the book. Some of the stuff was just it was very disappointing, confusing, heart-wrenching to like look at some of his medical records, looking at communication he had with his doctors. It was heartbreaking because it was like feeling that he wanted so many different things than what he got in the end. And so
Yeah.
like, my compassion for him was there also. That was good, I think. Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, I didn't write the book seeking catharsis. I really did write the book with the sense of I have this ethical responsibility because I have this private personal experience that I could write about. But
Hmm.
I also have the professional tools to inform it and to help people make sense of this in their own lives.
There are some memoirs that you read where you're like, wow, this person is actually still really working through this.
Mm-hmm.
You had felt what you needed to feel. And so when it came time to actually write this thing that you wanted to share with people because of your ethical responsibility, because of your specific perspective, it wasn't like you got weighed down in the emotional feelings of things. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah, I think with some of that is. I mean, or other drafts I wrote did that. And
Yeah.
you know what
Okay.
in a
Yeah.
sense, like it's, yeah, because I agree. I mean, well, I don't know. Maybe some people like the memoir that they read where the person seems to be still going through it. I don't know how you feel about that.
The big one that comes to mind is Britney Spears's, which was like a huge, like the number one most selling memoir. I think she needed to get her story out there, or the story that she could tell at at that point in her life. Obviously, looking at Britney Spears today, the woman still has a lot of trauma that I think she needs to work through. Did I enjoy reading her book? It was heartbreaking on a completely different level.
Right.
To me, most of the time when people share a memoir, it is because there's something that they're trying to give with it as opposed to receive. And that's the
Hmm.
difference, I think, when someone who's writing something that they still feel like is a very cathartic experience, that's their memoir. That to me feels like that's someone who's trying to receive love as opposed to say, hey, here's what I lived through. Here's how I experienced it. Here's what I learned. Here's maybe what we can reflect on together. That's a gift. And I do think your memoir at the end of the day was a gift. When I read what you experienced, I just wonder, was that difficult for you to have to sit through again and again and again as
Right.
you're rewriting these
Okay, and
drafts?
I think that's the difference. That's exactly, in a way, you just sort of helped me say that and think through that, because it's like the or the writers who do those memoirs that it's like they're deep in the throes of it and you can kind of tell.
Yeah.
I think they ask too much of the reader. I think they
Mm.
burden the reader.
Mm.
They haven't really done their own work yet.
Yeah.
Like, I think that we benefit from memoirs where you know that the person did their work. Like I did the hard interior work. I don't want people to read mine and worry about me. I think that's the responsibility of a good memoirist. The reader isn't left still worrying about the person. They can trust that the person, the writer, has done their work, their research, their reflection, their interior work, just gone through their shit. Like
Yeah,
it's,
yeah. And it's not about tying the memoir up in a bow and it being a happy ending, because
but
how
like
can you
I'm
do that? It's
okay.
life.
Right.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly.
My book does not have really a happy ending, but it does have a sense of I'm in a little bit of a different place than I was before,
Yeah.
and life still marches on, but like I'm okay.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I've actually never tried to clarify types of memoir or my reaction to memoirs. So this is actually really fun to kind of realize, yeah, one feels like the writer's trying to receive something, and one feels like the writer's trying to give something to the world. Okay, so getting back to your relationship with your father, why do you think that you were able to continue to choose to have a relationship with him? And not only that, but feel so much love and compassion for him.
Yeah, I know. And people ask this, and actually, this is where a lot of my students are just like, I wouldn't have stayed,
Yeah.
or I wouldn't be talking to my dad, or I don't, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it didn't even occur to me really to just say bye, see ya. In the moments it occurred to me, it was more in a reflective moment. There was a moment seeing him in a wheelchair in a nursing home and just thinking like, I can just totally extricate myself right now. I can just walk through those glass doors and just like be like, goodbye, see ya. Like I'm done. I'm never coming back here. But
Yeah.
I never did.
Do you think any aspect of that was filial piety? I just recently learned this term last year, which is basically, this idea that as children, we owe something to our parents.
That's an interesting one. Perhaps there's a lot of pressure on only children. And as an only child with older parents, when I was born, my dad was 42 and
Hmm.
my mom is 35, which in 1969 was having really older parents.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You don't feel it was a sense of duty. It was you wanting to still have that relationship. And when the cards fell, you wanted to take care of him.
Yeah, but there
Yeah.
is more responsibility on only child because
Yeah.
there's this sense of who else was going to do this,
Right.
and my parents had divorced. My mom, she wanted the divorce, and they announced this to me right before my 30th birthday. So they were 72 and 64 when they divorced, which is really much later in life. And then my mother remarried, in her 70s, late 70s. This is to say that, like, I mean, there's lots of lives in a life, right?
True. And everyone has a different threshold too. You come from such a different place of understanding, I think, because of your curiosity and your educational background. When it comes to people who are in abusive relationships, and you've worked in the domestic violence space. Talk to me a little bit about this. I've read other articles and writings where people try their best to explain why someone stays in an abusive relationship, right? It's like that person's not just a monster, or they weren't a monster for a long time and they actually showed you a lot of love. And there's that hope and that desperation that if you are just good enough, that monster will stay away, right? All these things. I feel like we have to talk about it because it's a space that you existed in, and also because of the way that you were able to stay in this
Mm-hmm.
relationship with your father. I just think people would be really curious about this.
Yeah, it's a great question because it does bring up the fact that if this were a partner, I would have left.
Okay.
Yeah. And maybe that also answers a little bit more of your last question that, I mean, with a parent, I did feel more, I don't know, more beholden, more loyal, more, still trying to work it out, still trying in the end to like have the relationship with him I wanted so badly.
Yeah.
And to sort of repair stuff. No, but with a partner, oh no, I would like to think I would have found a way to get out. Absolutely.
The good moments with your parents are so good. And you just want to hold on to that and believe that that's who they still are, even if they're not showing that to you anymore. And I really understood that part. Like, you didn't just show us all the difficult things that your father said or did to you. You showed us all the beautiful ways that he made you feel special and loved and valued. And it showed the nuance of who he was. And it did help us understand why it was so important for you to take care of him.
Right, exactly. And I can't imagine him just being alone through that. Like, I feel badly enough that I didn't make it right before he died. It's like
Yeah.
I found out he died when I was at the airport checking in for my flight to go see him.
Ugh,
And
yeah.
like, I still feel torn up about that. In a sense, I wish I had done even more than I did, but I had so many more limitations on me at that time. And I see that now.
What is the work that you do in the domestic violence space? Are you working with the survivors of domestic assault? Are you working with the assaulters themselves?
So when I moved to Boston in 1994, I got connected to the oldest battering intervention program that's in the country called Emerge. It was one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. I was working as a counselor with violent men, and I was co-facilitating the group with usually a man. And it was a group of guys, like maybe about, could be 10, 15 clients that we would see. It was absolutely formative because I was doing this in my, 20s and 30s and just thinking so much about relationships, intimacy, marriage, caregiving, all these kinds of issues. It was really, it was like quite a living laboratory for thinking about this stuff. And then helping men to really examine their own relationship histories, their own life choices, their own circumstances. It's hard. I mean, this stuff it's not like it changes overnight, but I think in many cases we were able to at least help them reduce or eliminate certain behaviors and question other behaviors. And many of them had been bullied, themselves. So this kind of stuff really lingers. I learned so much in working in that program. And then through them, I, also did these partner contacts and worked with women, talking with them about patterns of abuse, causes, consequences of violence. The thing is like you've sort of said it. I mean, I'm just going to say this in a different way, but it's like anyone who's been in these kinds of situations, it's like you believe that the person that you love loves you back.
Yeah.
And we want the relationship to continue, but we want the crazy making behavior to stop. We want the abuse to stop. Sometimes those are not compatible goals. Sometimes it's like that doesn't always happen. It didn't totally happen for me. I mean, there were towards the end, though, I mean, he kind of softened too, but it's hard to really want this relationship, to care about this relationship so much, but wanting the behavior to stop. And if it doesn't, it's like, well, I definitely don't think, even though I wrote this memoir the way I did, I in no way think that people should stay in abusive relationships.
Yeah. I mean, this was just you sharing your story and your perspective in this very specific, nuanced situation. And
Right.
you offer up a lot of things to reflect on. In no way was your memoir, and that's why all of us need to just love our parents, no matter how abusive they are, and take
Right.
care of them. It's like, hey, life is difficult, relationships are difficult. My father was a difficult person, and I chose to continue this relationship. And then caregiving towards the end of his life is a difficult situation too. Do you feel like in working with these men, it maybe even subconsciously helped you understand your father a little bit more and therefore helped you have grace and compassion for him?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, not only did working with these guys help me think about my own relationships, but it definitely helped me think about the complexity with my dad. Absolutely. The contradictory stuff too. I mean, where my dad, you know, he was like worried about my safety in working at this place. And
Yeah.
then there's like the evening I'm on the phone with him, he was just really getting very agitated about the fact that, I was at this place so late. Like I would stay till like 10, 11 o'clock at night. And there was just that moment where I said to him, like, Dad, these guys have done stuff and said stuff that's really not different than what you did. Do you understand that? That was like the closest I really got to like pushing that with him.
And holding the mirror up. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was
Yeah.
disturbing to him. He didn't have that much of a reaction to it because in a certain way I was just saying what was true, what is or what was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it helped me to understand like why I could hold on to this constant tension between love and abuse and, the forgiveness and blame and all of that. The thing about the society that we live in is that we don't have an easy time, and social media hasn't made it easier at all. People don't have a lot of understanding of nuance and of
Yeah.
ambiguity and of ambivalence and of like contradiction and dealing with two competing things that are difficult at the same time. It's like, there's always just this like people have to sort of think in this really absolutist kind of way. What I realized in all of my experiences professionally and then personally with my dad, and then in writing the book, is that the invitation was embrace the ambivalence, embrace the complexity, like hold on to both of those things. The challenging space in life is to hold on to both of those things. Maybe not too tight, not too loose, but to like, it's not that I forgive my dad, because I don't really even totally forgive my dad. But there's also like this sense of he tried his best with his own limitations and his own unmet needs and desires. And there's complexity with my mother.
You also bring up kind of realizing how he was raised and how that
Yes.
shined a light. Oh, we're conditioned to respond certain ways. It's up to us to understand our behavior and our patterns and to do the work to change them. But first, we have to understand that. And I don't think everybody does.
Add to this the fact that, I mean, this is the part I really appreciated about him was like, this was a guy who was very far ahead of his time in certain ways. He didn't have an issue with the idea of like a woman becoming president. So it's like in a certain way, he was kind of very progressive.
Mhm.
I don't give him a pass. I think that's pretty clear. I don't really give him a pass, but I give a little bit of a sense of, yeah, Dad, I get it. You tried your best, but please also know all the ways in which this deeply affected me
Yeah.
and sort of marked and changed my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And your memoir offers that to the people in your situation too. Like, I see you. This is really complicated. This is really difficult. I see you every day navigating that line. You write this, you say, this story is far more complicated than whether abusers know they abused, regret what they've done, and can change. It's more of a legacy of how we learn love and ultimately what we do with it. And I thought that that was just beautiful. And I feel like it really kind of sums up everything that we've been talking about today. And I do appreciate that you said, like, I don't fully forgive my father. And I always hate that phrase where they're like, forgiveness is for you. And it's like, well, I don't know about that. Like, do we have to forgive to move on? No. Thank you. Thank you for shaking your head.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing that I don't like about the word probably is that there's the idea of it's for you. Well, no, but it
Yeah.
seems to just give the other person this like, yeah, I'm okay with this or I forgive.
Yeah.
Like, no. And also, I don't like the religious connotation to it personally, although I'm not so sure that redemption is any better for that. But there's something about forgiveness and like sin and stuff. It just doesn't ring true for me. And it's like, and maybe also because my father, when he did something really atrocious, he was very quick to apologize too and wanted to sort of like, erase it and like start over and kind of demanded of me come around quickly, which I talk about in the book and I learned
Yeah.
to do to a fault. That's why I don't like the word forgiveness, because it's burdening me with that again.
Hmm.
Kind of the way you just were talking about.
You can understand why someone is the way that they are, but still not accept that or still not be fully okay with that. And if someone doesn't ask for forgiveness, why do you have to do anything about it?
Oh my gosh. So I was friends with a woman. She and her husband would speak at my classes. They lost their daughter to a domestic homicide. And students would always ask, like, do you now forgive him? Shirley, the mother, would always say, he never asked for forgiveness, really. He did not appropriately ever apologize. Like, what's to forgive him for? Like, have I moved on with my life? Have I done other things with my life? Yes. And I just found it very affirming to hear her say this, because it wasn't said in a way that was being vengeful. Like, in fact, she didn't want him to have the death penalty. It's just interesting, kinds of like what people expect other people to feel about this stuff, or the pressure that people put on themselves for that. And of course,
Yeah.
the forgiveness question comes up all the time.
Yeah, yeah, I imagine. Okay, so before I let you go, do you have anything that you would like to say about the caregiving space?
I wish that there was something for caregivers, like some sort of money, something. I was doing the caregiving through graduate school. And so part of the reason I was so constrained with being able to help my father was that I was dealing with student loans. I was teaching in two universities, one in Massachusetts, one in Connecticut, while also counseling violent men on the side. I mean, three jobs and trying to hold down my own relationship and setting up a home and doing all these things and just feeling I was so financially burdened. And the kinds of things I wanted to do for my dad, I really couldn't do.
Yeah.
And I was long distance too, being in Boston, he was in Cleveland. The amount of times I needed to travel there and the cost of it was like a work trip. I mean, really, I guess it just like I wish that we lived in a society that better understood caregiving and that had better friendly policies in place to help people so that they could do better. I mean, so much of caregiving is just offloaded to families who don't really know what to do and how to
Yeah.
do it. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I was grateful to have the care for him in places that he had it, but it was hard to feel so, financially constrained and then feeling like I kept coming up short as a result.
Yeah. And just to clarify, like you said, he wasn't living with you, but it's not like the buck stopped there. It wasn't like, oh yeah, dad's in a home and everything's okay. Like, no, you had to be on top of things. You had to check things, recheck things,
Right.
help him live the type of life that you wanted him to have. There's a lot to it.
We don't really see caregivers, like we don't acknowledge them so much. Well, it's just part of invisible labor done by women. Like
Yeah.
that's the other thing is how much this falls on daughters or daughter-in-laws or
Yeah.
wives or so the gendered part of this is also a huge piece and totally relates to that kind of invisibility and stuff as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that your memoir helps shine the light on that as well. Before I let you go, there is a question that I ask all my authors. How do you stay hopeful?
That's a great question. How do I stay hopeful? I would say being with people I love, laughing as much as possible, being in nature is huge, walking, exercising, and being creative, actually. Writing keeps me hopeful. The world is burning, so make art is kind of the theme to create as many moments of joy as we can, especially when there's so many forces out there trying to extinguish that.
Yeah. Connection, stories, seeing people, hearing people's stories. That's the antidote to what's going on right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to just and to really be creative.
Yeah. To give yourself permission to explore what it is to be human.
Exactly.
Oh, Deborah, thank you so much for such a lovely conversation.
Thank you,
I
Alex. This
really
is so
enjoyed chatting
fun.
with you. Yeah.
Kudos to you for doing this because seriously, with the absence of, I mean, really a huge absence with book reviews in newspapers and magazines and things like that, I just find it extremely meaningful that there are people like you doing this. And especially like you've sort of specialized in with a certain genre and a certain audience. And I like, oh my gosh, thank you.
You're so sweet.
Just to put some food for thought out there, I will say that the next memoir I'm working on is related to my mother and art.
Okay. Yes. And we didn't even get to get to your mother today. And that was its own complicated thing.
It's a very complicated part of my story, but it's also really interesting. And the quality of how prolific she was with her art, I think, is what makes me persist with feeling like that is the antidote. That is what one does to stay hopeful and alive and fully engaged in the world.
I love that. Well, then we will definitely have you back on. You keep me posted on
I will.
That journey, and we'll have you then, if not before. Thank you, Deborah.
That'd be wonderful. And maybe you'll provide the information anyway, that if listeners are interested and want to find out more about me, to go to deborahjcohan.com. A lot of readers of Welcome to Wherever We Are would probably also connect with the Complete You book that I've just written because of the caregiving component with that, and also the sandwich generation of people who are caring for kids and growing kids and parents.
Yep.
It's fun to, even though it's hard stuff, it's fun to sort of just talk about this stuff with people, and especially people like you who are just carefully and thoughtfully reading and just genuinely having questions.
Thank you. Thank you. And we will link ways to buy both of those books on our
Great.
show notes.
Alex, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Deborah, for such great conversation. And thank you for listening. If you liked our conversation today, please rate and review the show and share it with a friend. It would mean so much to me. And if you'd like to further support us, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Patreon for bonus content. And we're even on Substack. All of these are linked in the show notes. Next week, my friend Mackenzie joins me to discuss Demi Moore's 2019 memoir, Inside Out. It's her candid, best-selling reflection on her traumatic childhood, rapid rise to fame, and intense personal struggles. Her memoir details her battles with addiction, tumultuous marriages, including Bruce Willis and Ashton Kutcher, and her journey towards self-acceptance. Until then, take care.